Little girl goes to the emergency room. When holes appear in her hand, doctor calls 911 and cries. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The emergency room doors slid open with a mechanical whoosh, and Marlena clutched her daughter's shoulder a little too tightly. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said to the receptionist, her voice thin and apologetic. "I know it's probably nothing. She scratches a lot, and I thought maybe—" The woman behind the desk looked up with practiced patience, her eyes shifting to the small girl beside Marlena. Daisy stood perfectly still, her hands pressed against her chest, fingers curled inward like she was protecting something precious, or hiding something terrible. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of hospital white that made people look sicker than they were. Marlena filled out the forms with shaking hands, checking boxes and signing her name 3 times. Daisy said nothing. She was 8 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days, and eyes that seemed too old for her face. When the nurse called her name, Marlena practically jumped. "Daisy Fletcher." Nurse Keeley smiled warmly, the kind of smile that was meant to put children at ease. She was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and scrubs decorated with tiny cartoon bandages. "Come on back, sweetie." They followed her down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and floor polish, past rooms with curtains drawn and the murmur of other people's emergencies. Keeley led them to examination room 4 and gestured to the padded table. "Up you go." Daisy climbed up with her mother's help, still keeping her hands pressed tight against her body. Keeley noticed immediately. She'd been a pediatric nurse for 7 years, and she knew the language of children's bodies the way they held their pain. "So, what brings us in today?" Keeley asked gently, rolling her stool closer. Marlena launched into an explanation that sounded rehearsed. "She's been scratching. A lot, especially her hands. I thought maybe it was eczema or stress, you know. Kids get anxious sometimes, and with school and everything." Her words tumbled out too fast, filling the space with nervous energy. Keeley nodded, typing notes into her tablet. "I understand. Daisy, honey, can I see your hands?" The girl's eyes darted to her mother. There was something in that look, something that made Keeley's professional instincts prickle. Fear? Shame? She couldn't quite name it. "It's okay, sweetheart," Marlena encouraged, but her voice wavered. "Show the nurse." Slowly, with the deliberation of someone approaching the edge of a cliff, Daisy pulled her hands away from her chest. She held them out, palms down at first, fingers still curled. Then, inch by inch, she turned them over. The silence that followed was profound. Keeley's smile froze. She'd seen rashes, burns, infections, every manner of childhood injury that came through these doors. But this was different. Across both of Daisy's palms were small marks, dozens of them, arranged in patterns that were too deliberate to be accidental. They weren't deep wounds, but they were inflamed, some scabbed over, others fresh and angry red. They looked like something had been applied repeatedly, methodically, over time. "Oh," Keeley breathed, and then caught herself. She looked up at Marlena, whose face had gone pale. "How long has this been happening?" Marlena's mouth opened and closed. "A few weeks, maybe a month. I thought they were just scratches from itching, but they weren't getting better, and yesterday I really looked at them and—" Her voice broke. "I should have brought her in sooner." Keeley stood up, her mind already running through protocols. "I'm going to get the doctor, okay? Just sit tight." She touched Daisy's shoulder gently. "You're very brave." The moment she stepped out of the room, Keeley's expression changed. She walked quickly to the nurse's station and picked up the phone. "I need Dr. Whitmore in exam 4 immediately. Possible non-accidental injury, pediatric patient, 8 years old." Within minutes, Dr. Whitmore arrived. He was in his 50s, gray-haired and gentle-voiced. The kind of physician who'd chosen emergency medicine because he liked solving puzzles under pressure. Keeley briefed him quietly outside the door, and he nodded, his expression growing serious. When he entered the examination room, he brought with him an air of calm authority. "Hello, Daisy. I'm Dr. Whitmore. I hear your hands are bothering you. He pulled up a stool and sat at her level, not towering over her. Can I take a look? Daisy extended her hands again, more readily this time, as if she'd already crossed some invisible threshold. Dr. Whitmore examined them carefully, his face neutral, but Keeley saw the tightening around his eyes. He asked Daisy gentle questions. Did they hurt? When did it start? Did she remember how it happened? Daisy answered in monosyllables, her voice barely above a whisper. Then he turned to Marlena. I need to understand what we're dealing with here. Have you noticed these marks before? Marlena nodded miserably. Yes, but I thought. Someone told me it might be a treatment. Dr. Whitmore's eyebrows rose fractionally. A treatment? A friend, Marlena said quickly. Well, someone I know from church. She said she could help with Daisy's skin problems. She does traditional remedies, natural things. I was desperate, doctor. We'd been to 3 dermatologists and nobody could tell me why Daisy was so itchy all the time. Dr. Whitmore leaned back slightly. What kind of treatment was this? Marlena's hands twisted in her lap. I don't know exactly. She called it a purification method, something about drawing impurities out through the skin. She said it was old knowledge passed down through generations. The doctor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I see. And where did this treatment take place? At her home, Rowena's home. She's very respected in our community. She's helped a lot of people. Dr. Whitmore stood up. Excuse me for just a moment. He stepped out into the hallway with Keeley. We need to isolate this room, get photos documented, call dermatology, and get Beverly from social services down here now. Keeley's eyes widened. You think? I think, Dr. Whitmore said quietly, that someone has been causing repeated chemical burns to that child's hands in the name of healing. And I think we need to proceed very carefully. Back in the room, Marlena was holding Daisy close, whispering something in her ear. When Dr. Whitmore returned, his expression was kind but firm. Marlena, I'm going to need you to tell me everything about these treatments. Everything you can remember. And I'm bringing in some colleagues who specialize in this kind of injury. Injury. Marlena's voice cracked, but it was supposed to help her. I understand you believe that, he said gently, but we need to make sure Daisy is safe now. Can you do that for me? Tell me everything. And as Marlena began to speak haltingly at first and then in a rush, the full picture started to emerge. A picture of trust misplaced, of desperation exploited, of good intentions that had led somewhere dark. Dr. Whitmore listened, and as he did, he felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. Another child hurt by the very people who should have protected her. Another case where love had been twisted into something harmful. He glanced at Daisy, who sat very still on the examination table, her damaged hands resting in her lap like broken birds. And he thought, not for the first time, how thin the line was between helping and harming, how easy it was to cross when fear was involved. The examination room felt smaller now, crowded with unspoken truths and the beginning of revelations that would change this family forever. Outside, the emergency room continued its chaotic rhythm, but in room 4, time seemed to have slowed, caught in the moment before everything would have to be spoken aloud, acknowledged, and faced. Dr. Whitmore pulled up a chair directly across from Marlena, his elbows resting on his knees, his expression one of focused concern. Behind him, Keeley quietly prepared a sterile tray, anticipating the need for photographs and possibly samples. The room had taken on a different quality now, less like a routine medical visit, and more like the opening of something that couldn't be closed again. Tell me about Rowena, Dr. Whitmore said softly. How did you meet her? Marlena's eyes were red-rimmed, her composure cracking like ice under pressure. At church. Well, not during service, but at a community gathering afterward. About 6 months ago. She took a shaky breath. Daisy had been suffering for almost a year by then. The itching was constant, driving her crazy. She'd wake up at night scratching until she bled. We tried every cream, every prescription. Nothing worked. Daisy sat motionless, staring at a poster on the wall about proper hand-washing. Dr. Whitmore noticed she hadn't looked at her mother once since they'd begun talking. Go on, he encouraged. Marlena's voice dropped lower as if confessing something shameful. I was at my breaking point. I'd taken time off work for appointments. My husband, Fletcher, he's a truck driver. Gone most weeks, so it was all on me. And I was failing. I felt like I was failing her. She gestured toward Daisy. Rowena overheard me talking to another mother about it. She approached me so kindly. Said she'd seen cases like Daisy's before. That modern medicine sometimes missed the obvious answers. She said she'd helped dozens of families. And you believed her, Dr. Whitmore said without judgment. I was desperate, Marlena whispered. You have to understand. When your child is suffering and nobody can help, you'll try anything. Rowena seemed so confident, so caring. She didn't charge money, she didn't ask for anything except that I trust her. What did the treatments involve? Marlena glanced at Daisy, who had now begun to trace invisible patterns on her hospital gown. I wasn't allowed to stay in the room. Rowena said the child had to be calm. That parental anxiety interfered with the healing process. She had a special room in her basement. She called it her healing space. Candles, herbs hanging from the ceiling. Very peaceful. Dr. Whitmore felt his stomach tighten but kept his voice level. How many times did Daisy go there? Twice a week for about 5 weeks. 10 sessions total. Marlena's hands were shaking now. Each time Daisy would come out quiet. Rowena said that was normal, that the treatment was intense but necessary. She'd put bandages on Daisy's hands and tell me not to remove them for 24 hours, to let the medicine work. And you never saw what was under the bandages? Keely asked, unable to help herself. Marlena shook her head, tears now flowing freely. Rowena said if I interfered, it would undo everything, that I had to trust the process completely or it wouldn't work. And I did. God help me, I did. She looked at Dr. Whitmore with desperate eyes. She'd helped others. People in our community swore by her. There was a woman whose son had terrible asthma, and after Rowena's treatments it improved. A man whose arthritis got better. Real testimonials from real people. Dr. Whitmore recognized the pattern immediately. Anecdotal evidence, correlation mistaken for causation, the powerful placebo effect mixed with conditions that naturally fluctuated. But pointing that out now would help no one. When did you start to worry? He asked. Last week, Marlena said. Daisy stopped eating much, she was having nightmares, and when I finally insisted on changing the bandages myself, despite Rowena's instructions, I saw the marks for the first time. Really saw them. Her voice broke. I called Rowena immediately and she said it was normal, that the impurities were being drawn out, that the marks would heal once the treatment was complete. She made it sound like stopping now would be dangerous, like we'd gone too far to turn back. But you did stop, Dr. Whitmore observed. Yesterday I found Daisy in the bathroom crying, trying to wash her hands over and over like she could scrub something away. When I asked what was wrong, she just kept saying she didn't want to go back there. That's when I knew, when I really knew something was terribly wrong. Marlena reached for Daisy's hand, but the girl pulled away slightly, an instinctive flinch that broke her mother's heart visibly. At that moment, there was a soft knock, and Beverly entered. She was a woman in her 40s with warm brown skin, and eyes that had seen too much but still held compassion. She introduced herself as a social worker with the hospital. Marlena's face went white. Why do we need a social worker? I brought her here. I'm trying to help her now. And we appreciate that, Beverly said kindly, taking a seat. But when we see injuries like this on a child, we have to follow certain procedures to make sure everyone stays safe. It's not about blame, it's about protection. The word injuries hung in the air like an accusation. Dr. Whitmore stood. I'm going to have our dermatologist take a look, and we need to document everything carefully. Marlena, I know this is overwhelming, but you did the right thing bringing Daisy in today. After he left, Beverly turned to Daisy with a gentle smile. Can I talk to you for a few minutes, just us? She asked. Marlena started to protest, but Beverly raised a hand. It's standard procedure. I'll be right outside the door and it will only take a moment. Is that okay, Daisy? The girl nodded, and reluctantly Marlena stepped out with Keely, leaving Beverly alone with the child. Beverly pulled her chair close but not too close, respecting Daisy's space. "You're not in trouble," she said first. "I want you to know that. Nothing that happened is your fault. I just want to understand what you've been going through. Can you tell me about the visits to Rowena's house?" Daisy was silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice so quiet Beverly had to lean in to hear, she began to speak. "The room was dark except for candles. Rowena would make me sit in a special chair and put my hands on a table. She'd say prayers in words I didn't understand. Then she'd put paste on my hands. It burned." Her voice hitched. "It burned so much I wanted to scream, but she said I had to be quiet and brave. That if I cried or pulled away, the bad things inside me would stay there forever." Beverly's heart ached, but her face remained calm and encouraging. "Did you tell your mom it hurt?" "Rowena said if I told, the treatment wouldn't work anymore. That it had to be our secret. She said doctors wouldn't understand, that they'd try to stop the healing and then I'd be sick forever." "The classic elements of manipulation," Beverly noted. "Secrecy, fear, the illusion of exclusive knowledge. How did you feel when you left her house?" Daisy thought about this. "Weird. My hands hurt, but Rowena would give me candy and tell me I was very strong. She said the pain meant it was working. That good healing sometimes hurts first." "And now? How do you feel about what happened?" For the first time, Daisy looked directly at Beverly, and there was something ancient and tired in those young eyes. "I feel like I did something wrong, but I don't know what." Beverly reached out slowly, telegraphing her movement, and gently touched Daisy's shoulder. "You didn't do anything wrong. Not one single thing. What happened to you was not okay, even if the person who did it thought they were helping. Do you understand?" Daisy nodded, but Beverly could see she didn't quite believe it yet. That would take time, therapy, patience. When Marlena was allowed back in, her face was streaked with tears, and Fletcher had arrived. He was a big man with calloused hands and a beard that needed trimming, and when he saw his daughter's hands, his face went through a series of expressions: confusion, horror, anger, and finally, devastating sadness. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice tight. "Who did this to our baby?" And as Marlena explained it all again, Fletcher sank into a chair, his head in his hands, and for a moment the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and the distant beep of monitors from other rooms. A family was fracturing in real time, not from lack of love but from its misapplication, from trust given to the wrong person, from the terrible things that can happen when fear drives decisions. Dr. Whitmore returned with Dr. Simmons, a sharp-eyed dermatologist who examined Daisy's hands under a magnifying light. She asked permission before touching, explained everything she was doing, and took several photographs with a medical camera. Afterward, she stepped into the hallway with Dr. Whitmore, and Beverly joined them. Fletcher and Marlena could see them through the window, their serious expressions, the way Dr. Whitmore removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When they returned, Dr. Whitmore pulled up a stool and faced the family directly. "The marks on Daisy's hands are chemical burns," he said without preamble. "They're not deep enough to cause permanent scarring with proper treatment, but they were inflicted repeatedly over time. The substance used appears to be some kind of caustic paste, possibly lye-based or containing other alkaline materials that damage skin tissue." Fletcher's jaw clenched. "Someone burned our daughter on purpose?" "I don't think the intent was malicious," Dr. Whitmore said carefully. "But intent doesn't change the result. Daisy has been harmed, and we need to address that on multiple levels: medical, psychological, and legal." "Legal?" Marlena's voice was barely audible. Beverly stepped in. "When a child is injured, even unintentionally, we're required to file a report. It doesn't necessarily mean anyone will be arrested, but authorities need to investigate to make sure no other children are at risk." "You said Rowena has treated others?" Marlena nodded mutely. "Then we need to find out if there are other children who've been hurt," Beverly continued gently. "This isn't about punishing you, Marlena. You brought Daisy here when you realized something was wrong. That took courage. But we need to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Fletcher stood abruptly, pacing the small room like a caged animal. I should have been here. I shouldn't have been on the road so much. I should have protected her. Dad, Daisy said suddenly, her first word in nearly an hour. It's not your fault. He knelt beside the examination table and took her small hand in his large one, so carefully as if she were made of glass. I'm so sorry, baby girl. So sorry you went through this. Dr. Whitmore gave them a moment, then continued. Here's what happens next. We're going to start treatment for the burns, which will involve special ointments and bandages. I'm also recommending that Daisy see a therapist who specializes in helping children process difficult experiences. Beverly will coordinate with the appropriate agencies to investigate Rowena's practices. And I need to ask, do you know of any other families who've taken their children to her? Marlena thought hard. There's the Wilsons. Their daughter Kaylee had eczema. And the Tran family? Their son had some kind of skin condition. Maybe others, I'm not sure. Rowena was very private about her clients. Beverly made notes. I'll need their contact information if you have it. We'll reach out to them. Are we in trouble? Fletcher asked bluntly. Are they going to take Daisy away? That's not the goal here, Beverly assured him. Unless we believe a child is in immediate danger at home, our focus is on providing support and resources. You clearly love your daughter and want what's best for her. But we will be monitoring the situation, and there will be requirements, keeping all medical appointments, attending family therapy, cooperating with the investigation. The weight of it settled over them, the realization that their lives had just become much more complicated, that privacy was gone, that they'd be under scrutiny. Marlena looked like she might collapse. I just wanted to help her, she whispered. I know, Dr. Whitmore said, and there was genuine compassion in his voice. That's the tragedy in cases like this. People like Rowena prey on parental desperation. She offered you certainty in an uncertain situation, and that's incredibly powerful. But healing doesn't require secrecy or pain, especially not in a child. Over the next hour, there was a flurry of activity. Forms were signed, prescriptions written, appointments scheduled. A police officer arrived, a kind-faced woman named Officer Denise Marlowe, who asked questions in a matter-of-fact way that somehow made it less scary. She explained that they would be contacting Rowena, investigating her practices, and determining if criminal charges were warranted. These cases are complicated, Officer Marlowe said. If she genuinely believed she was helping, that affects how it's prosecuted. But ignorance doesn't excuse harm, especially to children. We take this very seriously. Daisy sat through it all with preternatural stillness, only occasionally looking at her bandaged hands, which were now wrapped in clean white gauze that Keeley had applied with infinite gentleness. Finally, as evening fell, and the emergency room's fluorescent light seemed even harsher against the darkening windows, they were cleared to go home. But it wasn't really going home, not anymore. It was returning to a house that would feel different now, where questions would hang in every room, where trust had been shattered and would have to be painstakingly rebuilt. As they walked toward the exit, Keeley caught up with them. Daisy, she said, crouching down to the girl's level, I want you to remember something. You were very brave today. Telling the truth when it's scary is one of the hardest things anyone can do, and you did it. I'm proud of you. Daisy's eyes filled with tears for the first time since they'd arrived, and she nodded, unable to speak. Keeley handed Marlena a card. My direct number. If you have questions, if Daisy needs anything, if you just need to talk to someone who understands, you call me. Okay? Marlena clutched the card like a lifeline. Thank you. As they pushed through the doors into the cool evening air, Fletcher carrying Daisy because she suddenly seemed too tired to walk, none of them noticed Dr. Whitmore standing at the nurse's station watching them go. He'd taken off his glasses again and was pressing his fingers against his closed eyes. You okay? Keeley asked quietly, appearing beside him. He shook his head. Cases like this, they never get easier. That mother loved her child enough to ignore every instinct, to hand her over to someone who hurt her, all because she was desperate for an answer. But she also loved her enough to bring her here when she finally saw the truth, Keeley pointed out. Not all parents do that. Some double down, refuse to believe. Marlena chose her daughter over her pride. Dr. Whitmore nodded slowly. I suppose that's something. He put his glasses back on and looked at the pile of paperwork still waiting for him. I just hope they catch Rowena before she does this to another child. They will, Keely said with more confidence than she felt. But both of them knew that people like Rowena, true believers with charisma and a gift for exploiting vulnerability, were never truly stopped. They just moved on to the next desperate family, the next community where they could operate in the shadows, cloaked in good intentions and the dangerous illusion that ancient practices were inherently superior to modern medicine. The emergency room swallowed them back into its chaos, but in examination room 4, there was a lingering presence, a feeling that something important had happened there, that a family's trajectory had been altered, that a child had been saved from further harm. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. In the days that followed, Marlena moved through her house like a ghost, touching objects that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The kitchen where she'd made countless lunches, the living room where Daisy used to play, even the photos on the walls seemed to belong to a different life, a before time when she'd been confident in her decisions. Fletcher had taken emergency leave from his trucking job, something he'd never done before, and his presence filled the house in unfamiliar ways. They were like strangers learning to live together again, circling around the great unspoken weight between them. Daisy spent most of her time in her room, and when she did emerge, she was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with peace. Marlena found herself replaying every decision, every moment she'd ignored her instincts. There had been signs, she could see that now. The way Daisy had started flinching when she mentioned Rowena's name, the nightmares that had started after the 3rd session, the way her daughter had stopped telling her about her day, had retreated into silence. How had she missed it? How had love blinded her so completely? On the 4th day, Beverly came for a home visit. She walked through the house with professional eyes, noting the toys, the family photos, the general sense of a home that was lived in and loved. She sat with Marlena at the kitchen table while Fletcher took Daisy outside to the small backyard. How are you holding up? Beverly asked. Marlena laughed bitterly. How do you think? I feel like the worst mother in the world. I let someone hurt my child. I was the one who drove her there, who handed her over. You didn't know, Beverly said firmly. Rowena manipulated you. That's what these people do. They identify vulnerability and exploit it. You're not the first parent this has happened to, and unfortunately, you won't be the last. That doesn't make it better. No, Beverly agreed. It doesn't. But understanding the mechanism helps prevent it from happening again. That's why we're here, to help you rebuild trust, to give you tools to protect Daisy better going forward. Marlena looked out the window at her husband and daughter. Fletcher was pushing Daisy on the old swing set, and for a moment, she looked like a normal 8-year-old, her hair flying, her mouth open in something that might have been laughter. Can she forgive me? Beverly considered the question seriously. Children are resilient, but they also remember. The work you do now, the consistency you show, the way you prioritize her healing over your guilt, that's what will matter. But Marlena, you need to understand something. Daisy doesn't hate you. She's confused and hurt, but she knows you love her. That foundation is still there. You didn't destroy it, you just cracked it. It can be repaired. How? Beverly pulled out a folder. Therapy for all of you, individually and as a family. Transparency, no more secrets. And most importantly, you need to forgive yourself enough to be present for her. If you're drowning in guilt, you can't be the parent she needs right now. Over the next week, a routine established itself. Daisy had an appointment with Dr. Hartwell, a child psychologist with a gentle manner, and an office full of art supplies. The first session, Marlena and Fletcher were asked to wait outside. Through the closed door, they heard nothing. No crying, no talking, just silence. When Daisy emerged an hour later, she was carrying a drawing, which she showed to her mother without comment. It was a picture of a little girl with enormous hands, and the hands were colored red and black, angry colors that bled off the page. "This is very powerful," Marlena managed to say, though the image broke her heart. Dr. Hartwell appeared in the doorway. "Daisy did excellent work today. She's processing through art, which is healthy. Can I see the parents for a moment?" In the office, surrounded by toys and books and boxes of tissues, Dr. Hartwell was direct. Daisy feels responsible for what happened. She thinks she did something to deserve the pain, and she thinks she failed some kind of test by not being strong enough to endure it without complaint. These are the narratives Rowena instilled, and they're going to take time to dismantle. "What can we do?" Fletcher asked, his voice rough. "Consistent messages. Pain is never a treatment. Secrets about our bodies are not okay. Adults who ask children to keep secrets are not safe. And most importantly, she needs to hear that you don't blame her, that you're sorry you didn't protect her, but that the failure was yours as adults, not hers as a child." The words were hard to hear, but necessary. Over the following weeks, they said them again and again, until hopefully, they would sink in. Meanwhile, Beverly called with updates. The investigation was expanding. Officer Marlowe had visited Rowena, who'd been shocked and defensive, insisting she'd only tried to help, that her methods had been used for generations, that parents had thanked her. 2 other families had been identified. The Wilsons' daughter Kaylee had similar marks, though less severe. The trans son hadn't been physically harmed, but had been subjected to rituals that left him frightened and confused. Neither family had realized anything was wrong. They'd been told the treatments were working, that the children's discomfort was temporary and necessary. "It's a pattern," Beverly explained to Marlena during one of their sessions. "Rowena genuinely believes in what she's doing, which makes her more dangerous because her conviction convinces others. She's not trying to hurt children. She thinks she's saving them. But belief without knowledge, tradition without science, that's how harm happens." "Will she be arrested?" Marlena asked. "That's still being determined. The district attorney is building a case, but these situations are legally complicated. She didn't charge money, she didn't physically assault anyone in the traditional sense, and she has members of the community who will testify on her behalf. It might end up being a restraining order, a cease and desist, mandatory education. The legal system isn't great at addressing this gray area between ignorance and negligence." The uncertainty was frustrating, but Marlena was learning to sit with discomfort, to accept that not everything had neat resolutions. What mattered was that Daisy was safe, was healing, was learning to trust again. One evening, about 3 weeks after the emergency room visit, Daisy came to Marlena while she was making dinner. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart." Why did Rowena hurt me if she thought she was helping? It was the question Marlena had been dreading and hoping for. She turned off the stove and sat down at the table, patting the chair beside her. Daisy climbed up. "Sometimes people believe things very strongly, even when those things aren't true," Marlena began carefully. "Rowena learned from people she trusted that pain could be healing, and she never questioned it. She never checked with doctors or scientists. She just believed. But you believed her too," Daisy pointed out with childish logic. Marlena nodded. "I did, and that was my mistake. I was so worried about you, so desperate to make you feel better, that I stopped thinking clearly. I should have asked more questions. I should have trusted doctors more than I trusted someone just because they seemed confident. I failed you, Daisy, and I'm sorrier than I can ever say." Daisy was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took her mother's hand, carefully avoiding the bandages on her own. "I forgive you," she said simply. And in that moment Marlena broke, tears streaming down her face, pulling her daughter close and holding her like she'd never let go. The turning point came 6 weeks after the emergency room visit during Daisy's regular dermatology checkup. Dr. Simmons examined the healing marks with satisfaction, noting the significant improvement. "The scarring will be minimal," she told Marlena and Daisy. "Another month of treatment, and we can probably stop the ointments. Your skin is healing beautifully, Daisy." Daisy looked at her hands, which no longer required constant bandaging. The angry redness had faded to pink, and some of the smaller marks had disappeared entirely. "Will anyone be able to tell?" she asked quietly. Eventually? Probably not, Dr. Simmons said honestly. You might see some slight discoloration if you know what to look for, but to most people your hands will look completely normal. What about the scars you can't see? Daisy asked, and the wisdom in the question made both adults pause. Dr. Simmons knelt down to Daisy's level. Those take longer to heal, but you're doing the work with Dr. Hartwell, and you have parents who love you and are learning to protect you better. Those scars will fade too, just differently. In the car on the way home, Daisy was unusually talkative. Kaylee came back to school, she mentioned. Marlena had known this. The Wilsons had reached out after learning about the investigation, and the two mothers had had a long, painful conversation about shared experiences and mutual guilt. How is she? Marlena asked. Okay, I think. We don't really talk about it, but she knows, and I know, and sometimes that's enough. Marlena marveled at her daughter's resilience, her capacity to process trauma and keep moving forward. Children were remarkable that way, able to hold darkness and light simultaneously. At home, Fletcher was setting up a new project in the backyard, a small garden plot he'd decided to build with Daisy. Thought we could grow something together, he'd explained. Something we choose, that we take care of, that grows healthy because we treat it right. It was his way of processing, of doing something constructive with his guilt and helplessness. That evening, Beverly called with significant news. The district attorney is offering Rowena a deal. If she agrees to stop all healing practices, takes classes in medical boundaries, and agrees to monitoring, they won't press criminal charges. She's also required to write apology letters to all affected families, though she doesn't have to admit criminal wrongdoing. So she just gets to walk away? Marlena felt anger surge through her. Not exactly. She's being publicly censured by the community. She's lost her reputation, and she'll be on a watch list. If she ever does this again, the penalties will be severe. It's not perfect justice, but it might be the best we can get. Marlena wanted to argue, to demand more, but she was learning that closure didn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looked like prevention, like systemic change, like other children being safer because of what happened to yours. There's something else, Beverly continued. The hospital is launching a new community education program about alternative medicine. How to evaluate practitioners, red flags to watch for. They want to know if you'd be willing to share your story, anonymously if you prefer. Marlena's first instinct was to refuse, to hide from the shame and exposure. But then she thought of the other mothers out there, the ones drowning in desperation, the ones who might hand their children over to the next Rowena. I'll do it, she said. The community forum happened on a Tuesday evening in the hospital's conference room. About 50 people attended, a mixture of parents, healthcare providers, and community leaders. Dr. Whitmore introduced the program, explaining the delicate balance between respecting cultural practices and ensuring child safety. Then Marlena stood up. Her hands were shaking, but Fletcher was in the front row and Daisy was at home with Fletcher's sister, and she thought of them as she began to speak. My name is Marlena, and I almost lost my daughter to good intentions. She told the story simply, without excusing herself or demonizing Rowena. She talked about desperation, about the vulnerability that comes with loving a sick child, about the seductive appeal of certainty in uncertain times. I thought I was being a good mother, she said, her voice steady now. I thought I was exploring all options, being open-minded, but I confused open-mindedness with gullibility. I confused ancient practice with proven treatment, and my daughter paid the price. When Daisy stood up, a small figure at the end of a row, and showed her hands, now mostly healed, the room was silent. Pain is never treatment, she said, repeating the words her therapist had taught her. And secrets about our bodies are not okay. The impact was immediate and visceral. Several people were openly crying, including an older woman, Mrs. Vance, who stood up suddenly. I need to say something. All eyes turned to her. I defended Rowena. When this came out, I said people were overreacting, that traditional methods shouldn't be dismissed. But hearing this, seeing this child, her voice broke. My grandson has been seeing someone similar for his breathing problems. I need to take him to a real doctor." The room erupted in murmurs, and Beverly stepped forward to provide resources and contact information. As the evening concluded, multiple families approached Marlena, some to thank her, some to share their own close calls with questionable practitioners, some simply to bear witness to her courage. One young mother, probably in her 20s, grabbed Marlena's hand. "Thank you for stopping me before I started," she whispered. "I was going to take my daughter to someone like Rowena next week. I'm going to the pediatrician instead." That was the moment when Marlena felt it, a subtle shift in the weight she'd been carrying. It wasn't gone, might never be fully gone, but it had transformed from pure guilt into purpose. Her failure had become a warning. Her daughter's pain had become a protection for others. On the drive home, Fletcher reached over and took her hand. "You were amazing tonight." "I was honest," Marlena corrected. "That's not the same as amazing. Amazing would have been protecting her in the first place." "Stop," Fletcher said firmly. "You've apologized. You've changed. You've done everything possible to make this right. At some point, you have to forgive yourself, Marlena. Not forget, but forgive. For Daisy's sake, if not your own." Over the next several months, life settled into a new rhythm that was almost normal, but fundamentally changed. Daisy continued therapy, her sessions gradually spacing from weekly to bi-weekly to monthly, as she processed and healed. The nightmares became less frequent, and slowly, her personality emerged again, the bright, curious child who'd been buried under trauma. She developed a fascination with science, constantly asking questions about how bodies worked, how medicine was tested, why some things helped and others hurt. Dr. Hartwell said this was her way of taking back power, of understanding what had happened to her through knowledge. For her 9th birthday, she asked for a microscope. Marlena and Fletcher's marriage went through its own healing process. They attended couples therapy, learning to communicate about the resentment and blame that had festered. Fletcher worked through his guilt about being absent so much, and Marlena worked through her need to be the perfect parent who never made mistakes. They learned to be gentler with each other, to share the load more evenly, to make decisions together. Fletcher cut back his roots, taking a pay cut to be home more often. "Money doesn't matter if we lose our family," he said simply. The investigation into Rowena concluded with the plea deal, and gradually the community's response divided into camps. Some remained loyal to her, insisting she'd been persecuted for practicing traditional medicine. Others turned away, horrified by what had been revealed. Rowena herself disappeared from public life, though rumors said she'd moved to another state. Marlena tried not to think about whether she was still practicing, still hurting children while believing she helped them. That was for authorities to monitor. Her job was Daisy. The support group Beverly connected them with was unexpectedly helpful. A collection of families who'd experienced different forms of medical manipulation or alternative treatment gone wrong. There was solidarity in shared experience, a lack of judgment that came from mutual understanding. Marlena formed friendships with 2 other mothers, and they'd meet for coffee monthly, comparing notes on their children's progress and their own healing. One afternoon, about 8 months after the emergency room visit, Marlena found Daisy in the backyard, examining something in the garden through her beloved microscope. Fletcher's garden project had flourished, tomatoes and herbs and flowers growing in cheerful abundance. "What are you looking at?" Marlena asked, sitting beside her. "Cells," Daisy said. "From this tomato leaf, you can see all the tiny parts that make it work. It's so organized, Mom. Everything has a purpose, everything fits together." "Like bodies," Marlena said. "Exactly. And that's why you can't just put random stuff on bodies and hope it helps. You have to understand how all the parts work together." Marlena smiled at her daughter's earnest explanation. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart," Daisy said matter-of-factly. "I just got hurt for a while. But I'm better now." "Are you? Better?" Daisy considered this seriously. "Mostly. I still don't like people touching my hands without warning. And sometimes I get scared that something bad will happen again. But Dr. Hartwell says that's normal, that I'm learning to trust my instincts better, which is actually good. She looked up at her mother. Are you better? It was Marlena's turn to think. I'm getting there. Some days are easier than others. But I'm learning too. We're both learning. We're like the garden, Daisy said. Dad took out all the weeds and bad stuff, and now good things can grow. The simple metaphor was perfect, and Marlena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were different tears now, not pure pain, but a mixture of sadness and hope and gratitude that they'd made it through. That evening, Fletcher announced he'd been approached by Officer Marlowe about speaking to other parents at schools, about recognizing manipulation and protecting children. Thought I could talk about the father's perspective, he explained, about being absent and how that created vulnerability. If I can help even one dad understand the importance of being present, it's worth the embarrassment. I'm proud of you, Marlena said, and meant it. They were becoming advocates almost by accident, transforming their worst experience into something constructive. It didn't erase what had happened, but it gave it meaning beyond just pain. The community education program expanded, and the hospital received funding for a dedicated team to investigate concerning alternative medicine practices. Dr. Whitmore was chosen to lead it, and he called Marlena to thank her for her testimony, which had helped secure the funding. You probably saved more children than you'll ever know, he told her. Keeley, the nurse who'd been there that first terrible day, reached out occasionally to check on Daisy. She'd become invested in their story, in their healing, and her consistent support had been a lifeline. You're part of our family now, Marlena told her during one visit. The good part of a bad memory. That's the goal, Keeley said, to be the people who show up when things fall apart and help put them back together. As autumn turned to winter and then spring again, Marlena watched her daughter grow not just physically, but emotionally, developing a confidence that came from having survived something difficult and come out the other side. Daisy organized a presentation for her class about medical science and why it was important to trust trained doctors. Her teacher called to tell Marlena how impressed she was with Daisy's maturity and advocacy. She's going to change the world someday, the teacher said. She's already changing mine, Marlena replied. 1 year after the emergency room visit, they returned to the hospital for a final checkup with Dr. Simmons. The dermatologist examined Daisy's hands and smiled. Medically speaking, you're discharged from my care. The healing is complete. You have 2 tiny marks here and here that will probably always be faintly visible, but they're not problematic. Your hands are healthy. Daisy looked at the barely there scars. I think I want to keep them, she said thoughtfully. Not because I like what happened, but because they remind me that I survived, that we survived. Dr. Simmons met Marlena's eyes over Daisy's head, and there was approval there, recognition that this family had done the hard work of healing. In the car afterward, Daisy asked if they could stop by the community center where the next education forum was being held. I want to see the room, she explained. Marlena understood. Her daughter needed to see the space where their story was being used to protect others, where pain had been transformed into prevention. The room was empty when they arrived, chairs arranged in neat rows, a podium at the front, informational pamphlets stacked on a table. Daisy walked to the front and stood where speakers stood, looking out at the empty seats. This is where you told people about me, she said. Where I helped you tell people, Marlena corrected. We did it together. I think I want to tell my story myself someday, Daisy said. When I'm older, I want to stand here and tell people that it's okay to question adults, that it's okay to say no even to people who seem nice, that your body belongs to you. You'll be magnificent, Marlena said, and she knew it was true. They stood together in that empty room, mother and daughter, both scarred in ways visible and invisible, both healing in ways miraculous and mundane. Outside, Fletcher waited in the car, patient and present. At home, the garden was blooming, producing food and beauty from careful tending. And somewhere in the community, other families were learning to question, to trust science, to protect their children better. It wasn't the ending Marlena would have chosen, wasn't the story she wanted her family to have, but it was theirs, and they'd survived it, and they'd used it for good. In the end, perhaps that was the only redemption available. Not to erase the past, but to build something better from its ruins. The community forum a month later drew an even larger crowd than the first. Nearly 100 people packed into the hospital conference room with others watching via live stream. The hospital had promoted it widely, recognizing the hunger for information about protecting children from well-intentioned harm. Marlena sat in the front row with Fletcher and Daisy, who had insisted on coming, despite being the youngest person in the room. Dr. Whitmore opened the presentation with statistics about alternative medicine injuries in children, cases where traditional healing practices had delayed necessary medical care or caused direct harm. The numbers were sobering. Then Beverly presented case studies, anonymized but recognizable to anyone who'd lived through them. Patterns of manipulation, exploitation of parental vulnerability, the dangerous combination of desperation and charisma. But the moment everyone was waiting for came when Marlena was introduced. She'd spoken before, but this time felt different, weightier. She stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of faces, parents with worried expressions, healthcare workers taking notes, community leaders trying to understand. "I'm going to tell you the hardest truth I've learned," she began. "Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes love, without wisdom, without questions, without boundaries, can lead us to hurt the very people we die to protect." She told the story again, but this time with more detail about the specific moments when she should have questioned, the red flags she'd ignored. "Rowena told me that parental anxiety interfered with healing, so I wasn't allowed in the room. That should have been my first warning. Any legitimate practitioner welcomes parental presence and questions." She described the secrecy, the insistence on not consulting doctors, the way pain was normalized as part of healing. "These are the signs, and I missed every single one because I was too tired, too scared, too desperate to think critically." Then she gestured to Daisy, who stood up beside her. The room seemed to hold its breath. "This is my daughter, Daisy. She's 9 years old, and she's going to tell you what it feels like to be the child in this situation." Daisy approached the microphone, which had to be lowered for her height. Her voice was small but steady. "I thought I was doing something wrong because the treatment hurt so much. The person doing it said pain meant it was working, but that's not true. Pain is your body telling you something is wrong. I learned that in therapy." She held up her hands. "These are almost healed now because real doctors treated them with real medicine. And I learned that I should always tell my parents if something hurts or feels wrong, even if an adult tells me to keep it secret. Secrets about our bodies are not okay." The simplicity and clarity of her message hit harder than any statistics could. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, and more than a few people were wiping their eyes. Mrs. Vance, the elderly woman who'd spoken at the first forum, stood up during the question period. "I want to update everyone. I took my grandson to a pediatric pulmonologist after the last meeting. He has asthma that requires medication, not healing rituals. He's been on treatment for 2 months now and hasn't had a single emergency room visit. Before, we were going every few weeks." Her voice shook with emotion. "I could have lost him because I trusted the wrong person. Thank you, Marlena and Daisy, for saving my grandson's life." The meeting continued with presentations from medical professionals about how to evaluate alternative treatments, questions to ask practitioners, red flags that indicated danger. A lawyer discussed the legal gray areas and why prosecution was difficult in these cases. A cultural liaison talked about respecting traditional medicine while ensuring safety. But the heart of the evening remained Marlena and Daisy's testimony, the human face of abstract dangers. After the formal presentation ended, people crowded around them. A young father asked Marlena how to balance being open to different approaches without being gullible. An older woman wanted to know how to talk to her daughter-in-law, who was considering a questionable treatment for her granddaughter. A teacher asked for resources to use in health education classes. Marlena answered as best she could, sharing what she'd learned, always directing people back to the medical professionals present. but what she said most often was simply, "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And always, always ask questions." The hospital's initiative grew beyond that room. They created a website with resources, a hotline for concerned parents, partnerships with schools to provide education. The local news covered the story, carefully protecting Daisy's identity while sharing the message. Within 3 months, 2 other questionable practitioners in neighboring communities had been investigated and shut down. The ripple effect of one family's pain was becoming a wave of protection for others. But not everyone was grateful. Marlena received angry messages from people who felt she was attacking traditional medicine and cultural practices. Someone spray-painted "traitor" on her garage door. A former friend from church called her a tool of Big Pharma and accused her of destroying a good woman's reputation. The backlash hurt, but Marlena had expected it. Beverly had warned her that advocacy came with costs, that some people would always choose their beliefs over evidence, their loyalty over children's safety. "You can't save everyone," Beverly reminded her during a particularly difficult week. "Some people will defend Rowena until their own children are hurt, and maybe not even then. Your job isn't to convince the unconvincible. It's to reach the people who are questioning, who are looking for permission to trust their doubts." Fletcher handled the harassment by installing security cameras and filing police reports. He also wrote an editorial for the local paper from a father's perspective, talking about the guilt of absence and the importance of shared parental responsibility. "I left my wife alone to make impossible decisions," he wrote. "I prioritized work over presence and created a vacuum that a manipulator filled. Fathers, we cannot outsource our children's safety. We have to be there, asking questions, sharing the load, protecting together." The response to his piece was overwhelming, with dozens of fathers reaching out to share their own struggles with work-life balance and parental involvement. Fletcher started an informal fathers group that met monthly to discuss these issues. Daisy, meanwhile, was thriving in ways that amazed everyone. She'd become something of a minor celebrity at school, the girl who'd survived something scary and was brave enough to talk about it. Her teacher incorporated her interest in medical science into class projects, and Daisy's presentation on "How to Know If Medicine is Real" won the school science fair. Dr. Hartwell reduced their sessions to once every 6 weeks, then once a quarter. "She's doing remarkably well," the psychologist told Marlena and Fletcher during a family session. "She's processed the trauma in healthy ways, developed strong boundaries, and maintained her trust in appropriate adults. That's a testament to the work you've all done." "Does that mean we're done?" Daisy asked. "Does that mean I'm fixed?" Dr. Hartwell smiled. "You were never broken, Daisy. You were hurt, and now you're healed. But healing doesn't mean forgetting or never having hard feelings about it. You might always have some sensitivity around these issues, and that's okay. It's part of who you are now." "I like who I am now," Daisy said thoughtfully. "I'm stronger than before." "You always were this strong," Dr. Hartwell corrected gently. "You just didn't know it yet." As the 1-year anniversary of that terrible emergency room visit approached, the hospital asked if the family would participate in a documentary about medical manipulation and parental vulnerability. It would be part of a larger educational series shown in medical schools and community health centers. Marlena, Fletcher, and Daisy discussed it at length. It would mean going public with their story, their faces and names attached to this chapter of their lives forever. "I think we should do it," Daisy said firmly. "If it helps even one kid, it's worth it." Fletcher agreed, and Marlena, though nervous, couldn't argue with their logic. The filming took place over several weeks, interviews interspersed with footage of their daily lives. The garden, now lush and productive, featured prominently, a visual metaphor for healing and growth. They sat together on the back porch, Daisy between her parents, and talked about the worst year of their lives and how they'd survived it. The documentary also included interviews with Dr. Whitmore, Keeley, Beverly, and Dr. Hartwell, each providing professional context for the family's experience. Mrs. Vance appeared as well, talking about how Marlena's courage had saved her grandson. And in a surprising development, Rowena agreed to be interviewed. She appeared on camera, her face tired and aged, and spoke about her own journey. "I believed I was helping," she said, her voice heavy with something that might have been regret. "I was taught these methods by people I trusted, and I never questioned them. I saw improvement in some children and attributed it to my treatments, never considering it might have been coincidence or natural healing or the placebo effect." She looked directly at the camera. "To Daisy and the other children I hurt, I am sorry. My intentions don't excuse the harm I caused. I've spent this year taking courses in medical science, learning why my methods were dangerous, understanding the difference between traditional wisdom and proven medicine. I will never practice healing again." It wasn't a perfect apology, and Marlena felt conflicted watching it. Part of her wanted to hate Rowena, to see her as a villain deserving punishment. But the reality was more complicated. Rowena had been a true believer who'd never examined her beliefs, who'd confused confidence with competence, who'd caused harm while genuinely thinking she helped. "Do you forgive her?" the interviewer asked Marlena after showing her Rowena's statement. Marlena thought carefully. "I'm working toward it. I understand she didn't set out to hurt Daisy, but understanding doesn't erase what happened. Forgiveness is a process, and I'm not there yet. Maybe I'll never fully be there, and I'm learning that's okay too." The documentary premiered at a medical conference and then was made available online. Within weeks, it had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. Comments poured in from parents who recognized themselves in Marlena's desperation, from adult survivors of similar childhood experiences, from medical professionals grateful for the educational tool, and from people who still defended alternative medicine, who insisted this was an isolated case, who accused the family of being paid actors in a propaganda campaign. Marlena learned to ignore the trolls and focus on the messages that mattered, the ones from parents who'd stepped back from dangerous decisions, who'd asked crucial questions, who'd chosen science over charisma. 2 years after the emergency room visit, Daisy turned 11, and the family celebrated with a backyard party surrounded by the community they'd built. Beverly and her family, Dr. Whitmore and his wife, Keely and her children, the support group families, Fletcher's father's group, Daisy's school friends. The garden was in full bloom, and Fletcher had built a small gazebo where people gathered to eat cake and laugh. Watching her daughter blow out candles, Marlena reflected on the journey. The scars on Daisy's hands were nearly invisible now, faint lines you'd only notice if you knew to look. The emotional scars had similarly faded, integrated into who Daisy was rather than defining her. And Marlena's own wounds, the guilt and shame that had nearly consumed her, had transformed into something else. Wisdom, advocacy, purpose. She would never forget what happened, would never stop wishing she could go back and make different choices. But she'd learned to live with imperfect forgiveness, to balance accountability with compassion for herself, to understand that being a good parent didn't mean being a perfect one. It meant showing up, asking questions, admitting mistakes, and doing better. As the party wound down and the sun set in brilliant oranges and pinks, Daisy approached her mother with something in her hand. "I made you something in art class," she said, handing over a small clay sculpture. It was a pair of hands cupped together holding a tiny garden. "It's us," Daisy explained. "Our hands that got hurt, but they're holding something beautiful now, because we turned something bad into something good." Marlena looked at the sculpture, at her daughter's earnest face, and felt the last piece of something click into place. Not healing exactly, because healing implied returning to what was before, and they could never go back. But transformation, acceptance, peace. "It's perfect," she whispered, pulling Daisy into a hug. "You're perfect." "Nobody's perfect, Mom," Daisy said with the wisdom of someone twice her age. "But we're pretty good at growing." And in that moment, surrounded by love and community, standing in a garden they'd built from ruins, Marlena understood the truth of her daughter's words. They hadn't just survived, they'd grown. They'd taken the worst experience of their lives and used it to protect others, to build something meaningful, to become stronger and wiser and more connected. The story that began in an emergency room with pain and fear and terrible revelations had become a story about resilience, about the power of speaking truth, about communities coming together to protect their most vulnerable members. It had become a story about real love, the kind that questioned and protected and chose science without abandoning compassion. As the stars emerged overhead and the party guests departed with hugs and promises to see each other soon, the Fletcher family stood together in their garden. 3 people who'd been broken and had healed, not by forgetting or minimizing, but by facing the truth, doing the work, and believing in the possibility of growth. The emergency room visit was 2 years behind them, but its lessons remained. Pain is never treatment. Secrets about bodies are dangerous. Love requires wisdom as much as it requires heart, and from the deepest wounds, if tended carefully, the most beautiful things can grow. They went inside as the last light faded, Daisy's sculpture on the mantel where they could see it every day, a reminder of where they'd been and who they'd become. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own questions, its own opportunities to choose well. But tonight, they were together, they were whole, and they were home.